Hello and welcome to this literature revision system lesson on Shelley's Love's Philosophy for the AQA GCSE Literature course. This is the fourth lesson in a series of presentations that will prepare you for the Love and Relationships poetry question. Please see the previous lessons. They're on YouTube or via the link below to the website for literature revision systems. And it will also be useful for you to check out the vocab lessons that are free. You can check the link on the website that will help you understand some of the key vocabulary used in the analysis I'll present today. Okay, context. It's always useful to make points about context, valid points about context in the exam. So there are three key ideas relevant to this poem. This is typical of romantic poetry. Romantic poetry being, of course, a famous movement in arts, literature, music, and poetry in the early 19th century, late 18th century. And so this poem uses natural imagery and expresses intense youthful passion, which was typical of that genre. It was also inspired by ancient Greek love poetry. This poem in particular inspired Shelley. It was typical of the second generation romantic poets like Shelley and Keats, who looked to the classical world of ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration. So Shelley was fascinated by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, a very famous thinker. Philosophy is, of course, an attempt to study the meaning of life. Our modern concept of romantic love was inspired by Plato's thinking. He was very concerned with identifying romantic love, eros, and that inspired Shelley to entitle his poem Love's Philosophy. So to the poem. The fountains mingle with the river and the rivers with the ocean. The winds of heaven mix forever with a sweet emotion. Nothing in the world is single. All things by a law divine in one spirit meet and mingle. Why not I with thine? See the mountains kiss high heaven, and the waves clasp one another. No sister flower would be forgiven if it disdained its brother. And the sunlight clasps the earth, and the moonbeams kiss the sea. What is all this sweet work worth if thou kiss not me? So a very famous poem. It's a popular choice for weddings and romantic celebrations. So as always, I'm going to summarise the content. Shelley refers to examples of relationships in the natural world. He uses these factual statements to suggest physical relationships between people are natural. And by physical relationships, he is suggesting physical sexual relationships. He suggests the world is meaningless if people do not have physical sexual relationships. Okay, as always, we're going to focus on three ideas. We're preparing for a 45-minute exam response. There are so many points that we could make about this poem, that the language is so many possibilities for analysis, that to make that manageable and to help us keep a system and consistent routine in our preparation, we're going to focus on beginning, middle and end. And I've highlighted those in yellow, blue and green, as you can see here. Now the notes I've made at the side colour coordinate to those quotations, and I suggest that you highlight the quotations in your anthology or copy of the text and use those notes to annotate the text. So you start to become familiar with the language and start to connect the ideas to the quotations. Remember, of course, you can check out the vocabulary lesson to help you become familiar with this language if it's new to you. So initially we're going to focus on the opening of the poem. The fountains mingle with the river and the rivers with the ocean. So it begins with a description of unity and harmony in nature. And these are symbols for love. These are liquid metaphors, aren't they? Fountains, river, ocean. It suggests the flow of nature, but it suggests that love should naturally flow between people. And that they're descriptions of physical intimacy. And suggesting that physical intimacy between people, therefore, is a natural expression of love. The poem has a logical structure, doesn't it, with these repeated factual statements. And that makes it seem like logically persuasive. It also gives a sense of authority. Facts are believable, you can trust them. And so it makes Shelley feel or seem trustworthy. It gives his language an authoritative tone, a tone of authority. And that's persuasive because this is a persuasive poem. It seems to be written to seduce a real or imagined lover, to seduce people that they should have physical relationships and not be scared of them. This repeated factual statements then are followed by the unanswered rhetorical question at the end of the verse to create this sense of longing and a sense of things not being complete and therefore not being naturally right. So it's a very persuasive argument Shelley sets out in the first verse, and that's the focus of our first key paragraph of analysis. We're then going to move on to our second point. So you may want to pause this as you're making notes. We're going to move on now to look at the start of verse 2 and the quotation, "The mountains kiss high heaven." Now you may notice that the imagery has changed from fountains and rivers, for example, to mountains. It's an increase in scale. It's more monumental, it's more grandiose, we could say. And this perhaps suggests an increasing sense of distance, an increasing sense of desperation, perhaps here, as he's becoming, as the distance is moving apart. There's also personification here of kiss to reinforce the parallel between nature and human relationships. We could also see what another logical argument, an argument that reminds me of the sophistic arguments, the sophist arguments. That's a form of logical argument used by ancient Greek philosophers, and again this poem was inspired by ancient Greek writers. Because perhaps sophistry is using logic and using facts to be manipulative, to have your way, to persuade somebody. And in this, Shelley was famously an atheist. He didn't believe in God, but now he's referencing heaven as sanction for his argument of seduction. So he may be either trying to claim divine sanction for his attempt to persuade a lover to mingle with him, to have a relationship with him, but they may also be ironic or sarcastic rather. There's alliteration with high heaven. And as Shelley certainly did not believe that heaven existed or that it had high moral status, perhaps this could be expressing his frustration with a kind of Christian morality or Christian hypocrisy, as he would see it, that prevents people being together, being close. Remember, Christianity would shun any physical relationship before marriage. And so perhaps this is an expression of his frustration. And then finally, we're going to move on to the end of the poem for our last focus, our last paragraph of analysis. And the imagery again has changed from the monumental scale of the mountain, and now we seem to have celestial imagery to do with the stars or with the heavens. We have moonbeams kiss the sea, so we could call that celestial. That's to do with space or heaven. Celestial imagery there. So from the beginning, where we had close intimacy, images of mingling, and now there is a complete distance, isn't there? Something completely out of reach. Which might suggest his increasing sense of desperation, which leads finally then to that final rhetorical question, "If thou kiss not me." And it's got this interesting word order with that. We've got that inverted word order, not "if you don't kiss me." We've now got "if thou kiss not me," with the word "not" coming after the word "kiss." So that emphasizes the kind of finality of his loss. It emphasizes the negativity of "not," and it emphasizes the loneliness of "me." Very isolated at the end of the line. So that's the key analysis for the poem in 3 parts. And now I'm going to show you how we're going to apply those notes in that analysis to an essay form, to write an essay style. And we'll, as always, we focus on the 3 ideas. And if you've seen the introduction to this literature revision system, you remember that we're going to use a consistent pattern to point out the context for a quotation, to evidence, obviously, the quotation itself. We must use quotations, to use terminology accurately, and to analyse the methods, develop our explanation, linking that to another quotation perhaps, or comparing to the other poem. Now, this process can be summarized using the PETAL acronym that many schools use, you may be familiar with, but it's important to follow that because it maps pretty much exactly to the mark scheme, which is a framework that the examiner will be looking for in your writing. If you point out context and use quotations, you get marks. They're both listed in the mark scheme, as is using accurate terminology, as is discussing the effects of methods and developing and linking your argument. So all this process will guaranteeably pick up marks against the mark scheme. So let's see how we can write, use the notes from our first analysis, the fountains mingle with the river and the rivers with the ocean. You can see the annotations that we made, and how that might read in a paragraph of analysis and essay style. So Shelley begins with a description of unity and harmony in nature. So that's contextualizing the quotation. The fountains mingle with the river and the rivers with the ocean. Notice that's a longer quotation of 2 full lines, and that's why we've got the forward slash in the middle to denote the line break. These liquid metaphors for love use nature to suggest that physical intimacy is a natural expression of love. So we've got a detailed focus on the technique there, liquid metaphors, and we've explained the effect of them. The poem's logical structure conveys its persuasive intent. It is written to seduce. So developing the explanation of that opening. An authoritative tone is created by the repetition of factual statements followed by the rhetorical question, why not I with thine? This unanswered question suggests his longing. So that would be an effective way to open the essay. It's thoughtful. There's certainly enough comments there for the examiner to grant that an examination of the language. Here I've highlighted the stages of that petal process, the point, the evidence, the techniques, let's see the technical terminology in blue, the analysis, and then the linked analysis at the end. So by having those 2 stages of explanation, we're really going to be developing our explanation of the effects of language into what's perceived as an examination. Okay, all the paragraphs of analysis are included in the ebook that you can access via the Literature Revision System's website below, along with a series of exercises to help you become familiar with the arguments and indeed to learn them and to learn the structure of the essay. The essay itself is of course not an analysis of one poem in isolation. It's a comparative essay. You have to compare 2 poems, the poem that's printed with any one other. Now you may remember, if you've seen the lesson on I Think of Thee and the introductory lesson, that I'm focusing on Elizabeth Barrett Browning's I Think of Thee as a key poem for the love and relationships cluster of poems, the ones that are thematically linked by the subject of romantic love. So each essay we write about a romantic poem will link back to I Think of Thee. And the way in doing that, we will reinforce and become more familiar with the concepts and the analysis that I've taught you in I Think of Thee. So if we imagine a comparative introduction between I Think of Thee and Love's Philosophy, it could be like this. Both I Think of Thee and Love's Philosophy are romantic poems using natural imagery to describe the poet's longing and desire. So that's an opening statement that links the 2 poems together and immediately establishes that this essay is a comparison. However, Browning's sonnet is an intense expression of love for her fiancé. So there we've got a statement about the form of the poem and the difference between Browning and now going on to Shelley, whereas Shelley's poem seems to be an attempt to seduce a real or imagined lover. So we've got a link between the 2 poems and then a clear statement about the differences between them. And that immediately sets out for the examiner that this is a comparative response and it's meeting that requirement in the mark scheme. Now in the ebook, you'll be able to find a series of exercises to help you master these different essay structures. It suggests that you can work progressively from grade 7 to grade 8 to grade 9. The essay structure for grade 7 will begin with that comparative introduction. Then there's a key focus on Sonnet 29, that's Browning's poem, where we'll look through all 3 stages of the poem. Then linking that to the end of Browning's poem, the analysis of the end of Sonnet 29, we're going to link to the analysis for the end of Love's Philosophy. And that's around about a 450 word analysis. And there are, as I said, a series of exercises to help you become familiar with that. Then there is moving up a step to grade 8, where we build in one more comparison, one more link to Sonnet 29. It's a longer essay, more detail, and that's why it would achieve a higher grade. But it's the same core for the grade 7. So once you've mastered grade 7, you can move to grade 8. And subsequently grade 9, which is then an integrated comparison. Remember, for grade 9, we need to evidence an exploratory response to explore the comparisons in more detail. So having that integrated structure, switching from Sonnet 29 to Love's Philosophy, will meet that requirement. And as I've said several times, you can find all the resources in the ebook via the Literature Revision Systems website. If you found this useful, please be sure to like the video below and check the next lessons and the previous lessons. Thanks for attending Literature Revision Systems.